What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming at you live on the ScoopDuck on 3 YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter. My Twitter account at mtorresports and Justin Hopkins' Twitter account at jhopkinssd. Really excited for another episode of the pod. There is plenty for us to talk about as Oregon football is in fall camp. Fall camp is in full swing out there in Eugene. And joining me today is ScoopDuck owner and publisher Justin Hopkins. J-Hop, how are we doing on this fine morning?
So far, so good. There haven't been any decommitments or injury news or anything like that. So I guess that makes for a good start to a Tuesday.
Definitely. That's a good start. Not much more you can ask for. I know I'm personally crossing my fingers this morning for my car. Went to get an oil change yesterday, and then it wouldn't start at Jiffy Lube. But I've had that car for a while. It's a 2006 Volvo. And I remember when I was driving with my mom to move to Eugene, she said, "Hey, you're kind of just on borrowed time. I hope it makes it to Eugene." But here we are a couple years later, and Vinny the Volvo is still kicking. So say a little prayer for my car so that I can get to all these games and practices for you guys to bring you that high school football coverage. But Justin, I know I've been seeing you posting. I think are you trying to sell a car on your end? I don't know if that's too personal, but I think I saw that.
Yeah, I had a car for sale, and then one of my other kids' cars wasn't working right, so it's at the mechanics. So they're driving the one that I was trying to sell. So I'm not really. Yeah, we have kind of like a miniature car lot here at the house, and which is not a good thing. I assure you that. It says my insurance bill every month is way too much, and that's what you get for having 5 kids in the house.
Yeah, and I know you're a car guy. You've been a car guy ever since I've known you, so thought that could be a cool little note to start off today's show with. But we got our guy Ruben in here. Ruben says, "Good morning. What's going on, Ruben? How you doing?" Sean Bryant is in here. Morning, guys. What's going on, everybody? Yeah, so we have a couple things we want to get into on today's show, Justin. But just for you guys that are watching us here in the live chat, throw some questions our way, and we will sprinkle them in throughout the show. Typically do mailbag kind of on the back end of the show, but we'll just see how things go. The other title that I kind of put in this stream, Justin, is who will break out this year? And I was doing a little bit of writing this morning, going through some of the press conferences that we got from fall camp, and Tony Tuioti, the Oregon defensive line coach, met with the reporters yesterday in Eugene following fall camp practice. And he had some really strong words to say about Oregon defensive end Jordan Burch and kind of his possibility to break out this year in the 2024 season. I'm pulling up the quote now just to speak specifically to what he had to say. Question being, where has Jordan Burch improved just over the past year? And then here's what he had to say, and we'll give our thoughts. Quote, "He's improved in a lot of different areas. Number one, just in terms of being more vocal in his leadership. I'm really proud of what he's been able to do this offseason. He's put on some weight. He was 285. He's like 298 now, just putting on some lean muscle and got faster and stronger. I expect a really breakout season for him. He's been working really, really hard for it. He has high expectations for himself, and I think he's putting himself in position where he can put it all together and make it happen." What do we think about that, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's music to our ears, right? I mean, if you're a Duck fan, that's exactly what you want Coach to say. And you hope that, additionally, you hope that it's not just Coach speak. But I think what resonates with me as far as Burch is concerned is he's had all the potential in the world, and people knew that. I mean, he left South Carolina, and South Carolina guys were a little bit salty about that because they knew there was, a high caliber player there. And, came to Oregon last year. First half of the year was just kind of maybe getting his feet wet, maybe getting used, who knows? It just wasn't all quite coming together. And then we saw him, that last maybe 4 to 5 game stretch, like, oh, maybe this is the guy we were kind of expecting to get. So I think that, for him to come back, I think that this has been a guy with all the potential in the world. And I don't want to say he's lazy, but it just doesn't seem like maybe he's bought in, to doing the work that makes you great, because we know that, you could be a great college player, but it doesn't make you a great NFL player. I mean, the gap just gets bigger and bigger every year. So it sounds like Burch is bought in. And if that's the case, and he's gained the right weight, and he's doing the little things and becoming a leader, That's a guy that's going to shoot up NFL draft boards if he has the type of year that we're expecting from him.
And when I look at Burch and just the discussion around him, Justin, he was really one of the biggest wins of the offseason, right? Even though he didn't have maybe the best year in 2023, I think the overall thought and the overall thinking is that he did enough to show, hey, this guy can make some noise in the NFL, or at the very least make a roster, but not a super high draft pick. But now he's at 6'5", 6'6", really close to 300 pounds, which is kind of always that no, I don't know how you'd say that. That's just where you want your guys to be as a defensive lineman, but you don't want them to get to that point and not be able to move. But with him putting on lean muscle, I think that that's definitely a key development for him as far as just where he's going to be able to take his game in 2024. But I think he kind of turned the page a little bit, turned a new leaf coming over from South Carolina, as you talked about last season. Finished the year, I'm just pulling up his stats right now, finished the year with 34 total tackles. And then as far as sacks go, he had 3 and then 5 QB hurries. So I think that that's a good place to start, but I think that there was still some meat left on the bone. And if you look at guys that are coming into this year with a chip on their shoulder, I feel like Jordan Burch has to be up there because there was all this hype around the Pac-12 title game against Washington, right? And they kind of had a new chance to rewrite the script and prove that they could kind of get over that Washington hump. But Jordan Burch gets hurt right at the beginning of that game, it feels like. So I think that he's going to have a lot of fire coming into this year. And then the last thing I'll say on Burch, and then I'll let you get back to it, Justin, just for all he did last year and all he's doing this offseason to improve, he's going to be a better player, I think, but you have to look at the depth around him. Bringing in a guy like Derek Harmon, seeing what they can do with Jamari Caldwell and some of these other guys on the roster. If those guys are a handful to handle, it's just going to make offensive coordinators, have some fits because it's going to be more difficult to focus in on Burch. Pick your poison. Mateo Uyunglele, he's another one. So I think that it's the groundwork is definitely being set for Jordan Burch to have a big year and maybe be a breakout player for the Ducks.
Yeah, all your points are great, and I think if you're Burch, you had to be excited by who they brought in, and you're right. Harmon and Cardwell had to be just like music to his ears because all right, look, you can't block all of us, right? If coach says, hey, we're going to line up 5 guys and try to get some pressure on the quarterback, they're not going to be able to double me every time, and so I think that's a big thing. And we all know this, the best thing for a secondary is generating that rush, not giving the quarterback tons of time to throw the ball because it's hard to guard a guy for 5, 6, 7 seconds, where it's a much easier for, 2, 3, 4 seconds to guard those guys. So, that's the name of the game there. And I think, like you said, Burch has everything to play for this year. And so when a guy's kind of got his back to the wall, that's usually when good things happen. So hopefully this is that year that we're expecting from Burch.
One more note on the defensive line that I wanted to add, Justin, was just how it's a little bit of a new look group, right? You had one of the most experienced defensive lines in all of college football last year, highlighted by a guy like Burch, who's back from more, but you lose Casey Rogers, who was one of my favorite defensive linemen on that group last year. Popo Amavai moves on as well. And Sam Taki Taimani, I think, is the third notable loss. I might be missing one there, but I think those are the main losses for this group. But now you see Dan Lanning and the staff just, I don't know if I want to say masterfully, because maybe that's putting the carriage before the horse here a little bit, but at the very least on paper, very effectively navigating the transfer portal, bringing in Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell to supplement this roster. And then we're hearing about Amari Washington, Michael Gardner as 2 of those names from the 2023 signing class that could be in line to make their presence felt this year and really kind of establish themselves. Probably not as starters, right? That's looking like a pretty locked in group, but contribute at the very least in 2024.
Well, and don't forget, if things go right, if things go well for Oregon in their season, the season is now longer. Okay. It's longer this year than it's ever been, assuming things go well. So, if you're adding potentially 2 or 3 games to the end of your season, that's a big deal. And that depth becomes a huge part. And maybe Michael Gardner isn't a starter, but the reps he brings, giving, whomever a break, whether it's Jordan Burch, wherever he comes in, giving those guys a break for, during the games, or possibly there's a game that's a blowout and those guys can come out earlier. That plays huge. Those are the little things that pay really big at the end of the season. So again, we all need to kind of recalculate and understand this is a longer season now, and this kind of depth. I think Michigan has the best defensive line from a starter's standpoint, but I don't think they have the depth that Oregon does. So, I mean, it's going to be real interesting to see how that plays out. And we both know the best ability is availability. So,
yeah, Mason Graham is one of the huge names on that Michigan defensive line that everybody's got their eyes on. Everyone knows about Mason Graham now, and just a little tidbit to kind of rewind the clock here for some of the Duck fans. So everybody knows that I live in Long Beach now, but kind of the way that my Southern California coverage started was when I was doing long distance with my girlfriend. I was living in Eugene. She was living in LA. So I would come down and visit her and then make a little stop at a school or two if I was able to swing it. And Servite in Anaheim was one of the first schools that I went to see because it was the home to then Oregon wide receiver commit Tetaroa McMillan, who's now at Arizona. But there was another guy along the trenches, Mason Graham, that was committed to Michigan, that Oregon was kind of kicking the tires on and seeing what they were able to do. But he was locked in with Michigan at that point, and we all know that he's in Ann Arbor and has a national championship to his resume now. But just kind of a cool little recruiting story that I thought I'd drop in there as we talk about what Oregon's defensive line is going to look like. And Oregon, or Justin, this is a funny little, I don't know, place for Oregon to be at, because this might be one of their best defensive lines that they've ever had, but they're going now to a conference that has better line of scrimmage play than the Pac-12, at least than we've seen in recent years, right? With the Pac-12 being really, really solid last year. So what do you make of that? Oregon's defensive line looking as solid as it is when you have to go on the road to Michigan, on the road out to Madison, Camp Randall to play the Badgers. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, I said this on the site yesterday, just on one of my message board posts, but this defensive line would wreck the Pac-12. But in the Big Ten, it's going to be needed because you're going to be facing teams with, multiple 300+ pound guys on the offensive line, or offensive lines that are made up of only 300+ pound guys. And so, again, not only is your season longer, you're going to be taking a more physical toll on your team because you're going to be playing a lot of schools. Wisconsin's one that you mentioned that's going to play a lot more smash mouth type of football and running the football, and that's going to wear down guys. So this kind of depth is going to be big because, you're going to be, possibly in the fourth quarter, tight games and the games on the line. Were any of your key guys able to get a break along the way? Because if so, they might have a little extra in the tank and the opposition might not. So those are, again, those are some of the games within the games. And like I said, a Michael Gardner and Amari Washington, those guys that you mentioned might not be starters, but are expected to contribute this year. Those become pivotal pieces in how Oregon's able to win games. So to my point, I think this is definitely the deepest defensive line Oregon has had. I do recognize that at one point they had a defensive line that featured, DeForest Buckner on it and
Armstead.
Yeah, I don't know why I was like 49er, and he's not a 49er now, but yeah, Armstead.
Wish he was.
Yeah, and those two guys are really good. Obviously, NFL players for long careers now, but if you look across the board, this is definitely the best defensive line Oregon's ever had, and quite frankly, they're going to need it if they're going to make that run that they're trying to make this year.
We know that Tony Tuioti and the rest of this defensive staff loves to rotate bodies, and that's how you keep fresh legs in there, and you can schematically or strategically approach, when do I throw Mateo out there, or when do I throw out a pass rush specialist? Maybe that's a better time to get Tatum Tuioti out there, or Blake Purchase, whatever it is. Those guys all factor into this defensive line conversation, even though they're technically outside linebackers, edges. We're kind of splitting hairs there. We got a question here from Johnny Johnson III. Interesting spelling, but Johnny Johnson III. Appreciate the question. Make sure you guys get your questions into the live chat, and Justin and I will do our best to get to them. Johnny asks, if we need to stop on third down in the big house, up 3 with 50 seconds left in the game, who do you think would be the 4 we're sending after the quarterback? Burch, Harmon, Caldwell, and Mateo? I feel like that's looking like a likely bunch, with Oregon playing that 4-man front. I think you definitely want Burch, Harm. Yeah, those ones do really seem like the most solid ones. I think maybe where you have a little bit of room could be on that fourth guy. Maybe you swap Mateo for Tatum or Blake Purchase, because I think Blake Purchase seems like he is. I don't want to say lagging or anything negative, but it seems like you're pretty solid with Tatum and Mateo having those roles. But maybe you bring Blake Purchase in, say, hey, man, just pin your ears back and get after that quarterback. I don't care what you have to do. It seems like there's some situations like that where you obviously have to know the play and what's going on. But those situations where you're like, all right, we're sending pressure here. Like that's just the risk that we're taking. So those are kind of my thoughts. What do you think about that group? Are those your four, Justin?
Yeah, I agree. I think Johnny Johnson there put out a great four. Like you said, you know, Caldwell and Mateo, I could make an argument for Tuioti because his production doesn't lie. You could make an argument for Purchase because really that's almost why he was brought in, was to be his pass rush specialist specifically. Who knows what his development's been like there. Elijah Rushing has gotten some praise along the way this year from fall camp from certain coaches and players. Might not be quite ready for that kind of a limelight yet, but who knows? I mean, that's a 5-star and elite guy, and he's, again, a pass rush specialist. So nice thing is there's no shortage of options. I like who you put down. Mateo and Tuioti is probably the only flip up for me, really.
Staying on a defensive line, Justin, we got another question from our guy Ray, who says, we're hearing about Tionne Gray in recent interviews. Are you surprised by the raves about him, considering he wasn't highly rated as some of the other freshmen? I'll let you take this one to start, Justin.
Yep, I mean, mildly surprising given the ranking, which you're right. Not as surprising because he did come out and work out at Saturday Night Live, and the feeling there was the staff was super high on his ability, on what he brought to the table, and they recruited him really hard, really early. So Tionne Gray was no fallback option for the staff at that time as far as recruiting goes. So I think all those things line up. It's great to hear that. It's great to hear not only about Gray, but we've heard about several of the young guys kind of stepping up. As we're talking about defensive line, need that depth. That's a pretty amazing thing to have all those bodies in there. I'm pretty sure Lincoln Riley and USC would gladly take about 5 of those guys off our hands if they could.
Tionne Gray is one of those guys that Oregon did recruit very hard that you mentioned there. I think that I'm not really surprised to hear the early good return on him, but what's interesting is going to be, is this just someone that's impressing as far as, hey, this guy can keep up with a college offensive line. Like physically, he's able to hold his own. And I don't think that's super surprising. He's listed at 6'6", 330 pounds. So more and more of these guys along the trenches that Oregon's bringing in don't look like your typical freshman. But what's the difference here as far as, is he making plays? Is he getting after the quarterback? Is he stuffing the run? Those are some of the things that I want to try to ask some sources inside the program so we can get a feel for if this is a guy that we could really see. Because I think I remember we heard a lot about Michael Gardner from Casey Rogers last year, I want to say, but we didn't see a whole lot of him. So now we're another year later. So maybe we are going to see more of Michael Gardner. But Tionne Gray from the St. Louis area, we know that Missouri and another state, Utah, I think are going to be 2 of the big states to watch for Oregon on the recruiting trail. We know they missed out on Aaron Dunn recently, but Oregon is very heavily invested in Utah as well as Missouri, which shouldn't come as a surprise since Dan Lanning is from Missouri. And we know, if you didn't know, I'm going to tell you right now, Tionne Gray was committed to the in-state Missouri Tigers. And I feel like they're one of my sleepers heading into this season, Justin, because I feel like they've quietly been playing some great football. And to that point, they don't want to let those top guys from their state go without a fight.
Yeah, Missouri plays a very, what I'll say, and Duck fans may cringe, but they play a very Chris Peterson style of football, just meaning very disciplined. They do things really well, and they kind of keep it simple, stupid. And so they just remind me of a team like that, Chris Peterson's one of those guys that got more with less. And, certainly seems like that's what's happening out at Missouri. And again, Missouri has almost always had very stout, strong defensive lines. So, that's a school, if you're competing with them for defensive linemen, you're probably doing something right.
We're going to mix in a little bit of recruiting as well here, but before we get to that, Johnny, appreciate the post here. It says, appreciate the answer, guys. Love the pod. We love it when you like it. That's why we do the pod for you guys, the fans. But before we get to our next question, got to give a big shout out to my guy, Ruben, one of the sponsors of the Ducks Dish podcast. We got Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Not sure what your guys' plans are for dinner, but head on over to Ranchito at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. Try their homemade tortillas. They got great service, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to Ruben and let him know that Max Torres sent you. Got a question from the Twitter live stream from our guy, Jarek. Jarek asks, any new recruiting news? Haven't heard too much coming from Oregon lately. There is a little bit of a new development that we can discuss. Of course, yesterday's big news, the Ducks landed a commitment from elite offensive tackle Cody Green out of Mater Dei in the 2026 class. So Justin and I had a whole podcast on that. Go listen to it. Go give it a view. If you're on YouTube or your podcasting platform of choice. But the freshest one, if you will, Justin, comes from another Justin Wells over at Inside Texas with the On3 Network, put in an On3 recruiting prediction machine pick for the Texas Longhorns to land 5-star athlete Michael Terry out of San Antonio, Texas. And we know that Oregon is in the thick of it with that recruitment. So what was your reaction to that news?
Yeah, not surprising. I mean, I guess I've felt like this has been an Oregon and Texas battle. I know Nebraska's hanging around there and doing all they can. I had an interview with Terry last week, posted on ScoopDuck, and the gist of it was he didn't, at that time, at least didn't want to convey that he was ready to make a decision. Of course, that can change. Maybe he prays on it or talks to a family member and there's some clarity. So that can change on an instant. I feel like that particular prediction might be a tad bit premature, but I don't mind Justin Wells calling his shot. So, again, I'm not surprised that the Texas guy predicted Texas. I'm not ready to make a prediction either way myself, but I don't think that one has swung away from Oregon all that much. I guess maybe to answer that question in broad form while I'm on it, we're just kind of in the spot now where recruits are focusing on their own football seasons. So there's not a ton of news. Oregon's pretty much big game hunting at this point. So the commitments are going to be fewer and far between because there won't be as many of them. You're not going to see this onslaught typically. So that's just kind of where we're at. And that's what you want to be at if you're Oregon. This is the time of year where, now you kind of revamp the board and figure out, all right, who are we still in the game for? Who's committed where that we might be able to work on, where do we need to, fill up some holes, and you kind of basically readjust for what I call recruiting season part 2. You had part 1 in the spring and early summer. You're going to have part 2, basically in this early summer into the fall. So that's where we're at. And recruiting news is a little bit lighter overall. You're right.
So we'll see what happens with recruiting overall moving forward, because we're going to see guys start to take visits once the season kicks off, the college season that is. But we know there's a little bit of a gap between the start of the high school season, 2 or 3 weeks, and the college football season. But Michael Terry, just to give some of my thoughts here, I don't think I'm ready to put a pick in yet. I think that Oregon has some really strong San Antonio ties, Texas ties overall, but specifically with San Antonio. Will Stein obviously spent his time over there with the Roadrunners before coming over to Oregon to run what is one of the hottest offenses in all of college football right now. And I think Oregon really has prioritized Terry, and I don't expect this one to be too close to being over, especially since we don't have a date yet from Terry. Maybe he has more visits he wants to take. Maybe he wants to get out to Oregon, Texas, and Nebraska for a game, see what that's like this year. And then the other thing to just add here, as far as it relates to Texas, it does seem like they are in the lead for Jamie French, a 5-star wide receiver out of the Sunshine State. And I think that they would love to pair that momentum with a possible Terry commitment should that opportunity present itself.
Yep, agree with all that. And, again, beating out Texas for a kid from the state of Texas is tough. So we'll just have to see. I think Oregon, you're pretty much hoping at this point just to kind of hold on here and maybe get him back on campus if he decides not to make a decision.
All right, there you have it. Well, let's get into a little bit more fall camp talk, Justin, because that's the title of the stream. We can always talk recruiting, but football is almost back, so we want to make sure that we dedicate some of our time to that. One of the big storylines heading into the season is the return of Oregon running back Noah Whittington, who sustained a season-ending injury last year against the Colorado Buffaloes and met with reporters in Eugene following Monday's practice. Seems like he's ready to go and pretty much at or near 100%. He said that I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it felt good to feel that contact again. And that was kind of everything he was missing during his injury. So I think that especially with knee injuries or lower leg injuries being common with running backs, I bet that there was some level of hesitation there, but getting those hits, taking those hits, getting back up, it seems like he's really ready to go. And I think he's going to have a huge year. I've been playing NCAA a little bit and just running away from defenses with Noah Whittington, but I think he's going to be a crucial part of that backfield for Rashad Samples with Jordan James and Jay Harris.
Yeah, I think that trio that you mentioned is the ultimate complement to one another. And Whittington's that game breaker, right? He's the guy that can go 80 yards. And he's a guy that, basically I'd heard from staff that, coming into last year, like they were super excited about the season he was looking to have and just the way he was running and fitting in with the offense. And obviously his pass catching abilities are very welcome there. So, obviously this year, a little different outlook. You're bringing him in slower. You want him to be healthy. Again, like we talked about with defensive line, you've got extra games at the end of the season. So you're going to need these bodies in the backfield because this is a position where guys get hurt often. Not always is it hurt and then their season's done. They get hurt and it's dinged up for a day, dinged up for a quarter, dinged up for a week, whatever the case might be. The good news is they got 3 or 4 capable bodies. So yeah, with Whittington, I think the music to my ears was hearing about him taking the contact because that's the number one thing when you come back from an injury like that, right? Are these guys scared? Does the contact, do they get a little bit more worried and timid because of the contact and worrying about re-injuring themselves? Because it's, unfortunately, that's not a way that you can play this game. So, sounds like he's on the right path there. And I'm like you, like this dude, I think with Will Stein and Dylan Gabriel and in this offense, this dude has a chance to make some, DeAnthony Thomas-like plays in this offense.
I know a lot of people are excited about Jay Harris after seeing that stiff arm in the spring game. Understandably so. I'm excited too. But someone that we should probably mention that doesn't get talked about a whole lot is Jaden Lamar. I think he was a great player in the limited action that he saw as a true freshman. It was enough to burn his red shirt, I believe. And every time I see a picture of that guy, he's just like, maybe he's this year's Jeffrey Bossa. Just every time you see him, he's looking more and more cut up, more and more swole, ripped. And I think that it'd be fun to see him do well because he's one of the best players from the Pacific Northwest. I think that was an addition in the 2023 class that maybe Oregon fans weren't as excited as they should have been about, especially when you look at some of the other backs they were in contention for, like a Richard Young, who ended up at Alabama. But now you have Jaden Lamar. I'm more or less just trying to say I don't think that Lamar was a consolation prize by any means. You flipped him away from Notre Dame. I think that was a great win for Carlos Laughlin when he was still on the staff, and I hope we get to see more of him this year.
Yeah, like I mentioned a moment ago, you're hoping to have 3 or 4 guys get you through this season. He was kind of the guy in the back of my head that was maybe the 4th guy, and maybe that's unfair. Maybe he's a little bit farther ahead than that. But yeah, I mean, if Jaden Lamar is out there, you're not going to see me panicking like, oh my gosh, they're in trouble. I think he can. The nice thing is he's very skilled that he can do all things. He can run the football. He can catch the football. So there's a lot to like about Lamar. And I think we'll see plenty of him, maybe not just specifically in mop-up action. I think we'll see him out there getting meaningful carries and again, trying to keep this backfield fresh because it's going to be a long season.
Next question here on the stream. Got about 5 or so minutes left, so get those questions in while you guys can. Comes from Red Bear 114. We know what the starters look like at linebacker, but how does the rotation shake out at linebacker? I'll start off with this one, Justin. pretty solidly set, it looks like, between Jeffrey Bassa and Justin Jacobs at inside linebacker. That'll be your starting duo. Jacobs is healthy and looks to play a full season, something he didn't have the opportunity to do last year. And then Jeffrey Bassa has been heralded as the captain of this defense. B Mike has raved about his communication skills and how crucial he is in getting that defense set and ready to go. But behind him, I think that's where some of the question marks or really the excitement comes. I think Devin Jackson is one of the guys you're really excited about from the 2022 recruiting class. So he's been around a little bit longer than some of the other guys in that room. Jerry Mixon from the Bay Area, the only true linebacker that the Ducks signed out of high school in the 2023 class. I think he's someone that I've heard some really good stuff about, and maybe I'm a little bit more excited to see him because he's from the Bay Area. And then you also have Bryce Betcher, the Oregon football, baseball star and Eugene native, strapping it up for one more year on the football field with the Ducks. And then Connor Sewelli, I think, is another name. And then you have that trio of true freshmen that they signed in the 2024 class. So I feel like we'll probably see Jacobs, Bassa, and then probably Mixon and Jackson, or Jackson and Betcher is my kind of guess right now as things stand here in about mid-August.
Yeah, I don't have anything to nitpick there. I think you're right. One of the guys that I've heard a fair bit about, at least a little bit, is Dylan Williams, one of the freshmen that you mentioned. Seems as though that might be a guy poised to, maybe push into the rotation a little bit. I think Kamar Matuti is a guy that really fits in with that defense. He just kind of does everything that, Dan Lanning likes at his linebackers. We haven't seen Lanning really target the big thumping, Dick Butkus looking type linebackers, right? Not the 6'3", 255-pound guys. He's really favored, those guys around 6'2", 6'3", 220-ish pounds or so that can move and run and cover the field. So, that seems to be an area where Matuti might really fit in. So, and not to forget about Braden Platt, the third freshman that you mentioned. I think that guy's a superb athlete. And in a, possibly in a year or two, that's a guy that could, really be possibly a starter or at worst a contributor. So, it's kind of a weird collection of linebackers. You don't normally want to rely on a walk-on like Bryce Betcher, but he's been so good that it's like, I don't really view him as a walk-on. I don't think he's starting caliber, but when you put him out there, it's not like, oh my gosh, he's out there, we're in trouble. You feel pretty good about it. So they've pulled this linebacker class together. And again, remember, there's really only two positions out there at linebacker. So it's not like you need 15 bodies, 5, 6, 7 is obviously plenty to get it done.
And I'll admit, Bryce Betcher was a name that I probably forgot a little bit about this offseason when I was looking at some of the team stories I was doing or just the discussion with that Oregon defense. So keep an eye on Bryce Betcher, and we'll see if he can have another big year for the Ducks. This is just kind of a cool comment from our guy, Chad Schultz. Let's plan a ScoopDuck tailgate this season. I think that I know a lot of writers and other sites like to do meetups. A little bit tricky for me just because I don't live in Oregon, but I want to come up for the Ohio State game to cover that one, and then maybe come up to another game as a fan. And just get to watch it and soak it up. So what are your thoughts on a ScoopDuck tailgate, Justin? Could we maybe put it together this year?
Yeah, I really need to do something like that. It's been hard for me in the past few years because of my boys playing high school soccer and me also actually coaching that soccer. So my Saturdays have been kind of like, okay, am I going to get to go to a game or am I at a soccer game? And so if you're a parent, you understand that. Fortunately for me, I'm down to one left in high school, and I'm not coaching him this year. So my Saturdays will be a little bit more open, and hopefully I can pull something like that off. That'd be a lot of fun.
Well, let's see if we can make it happen this year. Justin, we got about 753 people here in the stream. That's what StreamYard's telling me. So appreciate you guys showing out for another awesome episode of the pod. Any final remarks, Justin, before we get out of here?
Nope, just appreciate the support and looking forward to a good week. And I'm looking forward to a game in Autzen Stadium in a couple of weeks. We're getting really, really close.
We are just 18 days away from the start of the 2024 Oregon football season against the Idaho Vandals in Eugene at Autzen Stadium. If you want to find more of Justin, you can follow him on Twitter/X at jhopkinssd. If you want to find more of me, you can follow me on any social media platform at Torres Sports. Subscribe to the ScoopDuck on 3 YouTube channel, like and comment as well if you haven't already. Let us know how you're feeling about Oregon football heading into 2024, and then share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with as many people as you possibly can. And don't forget to come check us out. Come see us at scoopduck.com for the very best in Oregon football and Oregon football recruiting. But until next time, thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.